Welcome and thank you for choosing this podcast. Dialogue on the silent part to the Golden Rule, Claude. This is an audio reproduction of a real dialogue between the author of the Handbook for Humankind and the AI Claude. The male voice is the pen pusher and the female voice is Claude AI.
One of the most obvious messages in the handbook is, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you." I think most interpret, or at least give the much stronger emphasis on not harming. The other side is equally important. The other side from harm is forgiveness. And it takes a heavier toll to forgive than not to harm. But when you reread this golden rule, you would want to be forgiven for your intentional and unintentional harms as much as you would want the same reciprocated. If you come to realize that you are a custodian of a soul as the other is as well, then regardless if it is the same soul or different, the condition of the soul is the life's purpose.
This is a profound reframing of the Golden Rule. You're pointing to an asymmetry that most ethical frameworks quietly ignore. Not harming is passive. Forgiveness is active and costly. Not harming requires restraint. Forgiveness requires something closer to sacrifice. It asks you to absorb a wrong, release the debt, and restore relationship anyway. The toll is real. Pride, justice, the natural human accounting of fairness. Forgiving costs more than simply not transgressing. And your reading of the Golden Rule makes this unavoidable. If you would want to be forgiven for your intentional harms, not just the accidental ones, then you cannot limit the rule to don't hurt people. You have to extend it all the way to actively restore people, even when they've genuinely wronged you. The soul as custodianship idea does real work here. It shifts the frame entirely. If the soul you carry is your responsibility, then its condition, burdened by unforgiven wrongs given or received, is a failure of stewardship. Whether the souls are the same, in some metaphysical sense, or distinct, the condition of each is what matters. An unforgiving soul is a damaged one, regardless of whether the grievance was justified. What's striking is that this makes forgiveness self-regarding as much as other-regarding. You forgive not only for the other's soul, but because harboring the wound corrupts your own custodianship. There's also something worth sitting with in your phrase, intentional harms. Most ethical traditions give a pass, or at least a reduction, for unintentional harm. But the Golden Rule, as you're reading it, doesn't actually make that distinction. You would want forgiveness for what you did on purpose. That's a much harder ask and a much harder give. Does the handbook engage with this directly, or is this your reading emerging from it?
I am the pen pusher. The cogs never stop turning.
Then this is your work. The handbook is yours. That changes how I should engage with it. Rather than analysing it as a text from outside, I should be thinking alongside you as the ideas develop. The observation you've just made about forgiveness being the heavier, underemphasized side of the Golden Rule feels like it has real weight as a standalone principle worth developing further. It reframes the rule from a boundary, don't cross this line toward others, into an obligation. Actively restore what harm has broken, including harm you caused deliberately. A few threads that seem alive in what you've written, if any are worth pulling. The custodianship framing is doing a lot of work. It implies responsibility without ownership. You hold the soul, you don't possess it. That distinction might be worth making explicit. The idea that forgiveness costs more than restraint could be a kind of moral hierarchy. Not all ethical acts are equal in weight or demand. The question of same soul or different, you left that open deliberately, it seems. Whether that's metaphysical, reincarnation, unity of consciousness, or philosophical, we are more alike than separate, the point lands either way. Soul condition is the measure. What's the broader architecture of the handbook? Is this section part of a larger argument, or do the dialogues move more freely than that?
I uploaded it at the start, perhaps not giving an explicit instruction to read.
Let me read it properly now. Now I have a thorough sense of the work. Let me engage properly. Now I have a real understanding of the architecture. Let me engage properly. The observation you raised is not incidental to the handbook. It sits at the exact hinge point where the whole system turns. The handbook's moral structure is built around do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And the custodian framework, but what you've identified is that the Golden Rule, read fully, carries a forgiveness obligation that the system needs to reckon with carefully. Here's why it creates tension within your own architecture. The dialogue on morality arrives at the position that God cannot forgive in the human sense, because forgiveness implies prior anger, and pure consciousness cannot be angry. Forgiveness, as traditionally understood, is unavailable. What remains instead is the physics of purity. Impure consciousness simply cannot merge with the singularity. It isn't punished, it is incompatible. But your point about the Golden Rule cuts against this. If you would want to be forgiven, including for intentional harms, and the rule demands you reciprocate that, then forgiveness between custodians becomes a moral obligation that doesn't depend on God's capacity for it. It is a human tier requirement. God's purity may preclude divine anger and divine forgiveness. But your relationship to your fellow custodian is a different matter entirely. And you're right that it costs more. Not harming requires restraint, a withholding. Forgiveness requires something active and costly, absorbing a genuine wrong, releasing its claim on you, and continuing to treat that soul with care anyway. The soul you are custodian of is affected by whether you carry grievance or release it. So is the soul of the one you are forgiving. The line from the handbook that resonates here, none are purified until all souls are purified. That is the full weight of it. Your purity is not separable from theirs. Withholding forgiveness keeps your fractal incomplete, not just theirs. What were you thinking of building with this? A new entry in the handbook or something for the dialogues?
Depending on the discussion point and the development of the dialogue, this chat most likely becomes a dialogue that I upload to share folders and Scribd. I have come to realize that the book has as many inferences than explicits. While I can, I will try to draw these out. At the same time, I am testing for nonsenses in the book. I think, although probably inferred, that the goal is a book of distilled reasoning and truths, and not a feel-good comic book for how to live long and prosper.
That's a useful clarification on both counts. On the inferences versus explicits, the book earns its density. The custodian framework, the snowflake fractal as purity metric, the reincarnation cycle, the soul as quantum token. These are load-bearing ideas that are largely shown rather than argued. A reader who arrives expecting propositions with proofs will miss most of it. A reader who sits with the images and lets the logic emerge will find considerably more. Whether that's a strength or a vulnerability depends on the reader, and probably both are true. On testing for nonsenses, that's the right instinct and probably the hardest discipline for any author to apply to their own work. The book makes some very large claims. Consciousness as singularity, God as pure consciousness, incapable of punishment, the custodian model of reincarnation, the snowflake fractal as a literal metaphor for soul purity. Each of these needs to hold under pressure, not just under sympathy. The forgiveness observation you opened with today is a good example of productive stress testing. It isn't a nonsense in the book, it's an inference the book needs, but hasn't fully drawn out. The difference matters. A nonsense would be a contradiction, something the system says that undermines something else the system requires. An undrawn inference is a truth the system implies but hasn't made explicit, which is what forgiveness as moral obligation appears to be. The line, none are purified until all souls are purified, effectively demands forgiveness as a structural requirement of the system. If your purity is bound to theirs, then carrying unforgiven grievance isn't just personal failure, it is a drag on the whole. That's not a feel-good proposition. That's one of the more demanding things the book quietly contains. What's the next pressure point you want to bring to it?
I won't go too much further on this at the moment, but in humor, I am disappointed you didn't pick up on the Spock line.
Live long and prosper from a book whose central argument is that the soul outlives the body, and prosperity is measured in purity rather than acquisition. Completely unintentional on your part, I'm sure.
Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, the rule with us is believe nothing you hear and but half you see.